Hey, everybody. It is Monday, January 13th, 2025. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to, unless, Jill, you're in Canada.
Sorry? Is that that wasn't
sorry.
a good...
Sorry, Canada.
Sorry, yeah, so that's better.
Apparently, over the weekend, there's been an ongoing dispute between Meta and the Canadian government, going back a while now. It has to do with the fact that Canada passed a law trying to require Google and Meta to pay local news providers in Canada, basically as an apology to the fact that they took most of the advertising revenue from local news. So we saw this in Australia. We've seen versions of this in attempted in other parts of the world. Canada passed this law saying, Meta, Google, you basically took all the ad market from news providers. You should pay them some money. Meta responded by saying, well, no, and we're going to block news on Instagram and Facebook. Now, until now, Mo News has been a creator page. Somehow we were reclassified over the weekend to a news page. So our Canadian listeners and community members noted on Saturday they woke up to find that they couldn't access the main Mo News Instagram page anymore. Again, out of our hands, guys. It was not our decision. The Meta gods and I have put in notes to some folks in Meta, hoping that maybe they can give us special dispensation, especially since we're not a Canadian news outlet. We wouldn't be eligible for money from Meta. Nonetheless, for those of you who still want to get our main Instagram page, if you use a VPN app, which basically masks your geography, you can just change your location to Boston or New York or Chicago, that will let you see our page on Instagram. It's what people in Russia have to do, Iran have to do, China have to do, a variety of places. You in Canada now have to do that if you want to see the Mo News page. Speaking of which, there is a VPN that we have a deal with called Surfshark. So if you go to surfshark.deals/Mo News, we have a link to it in the show notes. Again, surfshark.deals/Mo News. You get a discounted membership for a VPN there that'll let you see the main page. Though we should note the premium page, Jill, still accessible to Canadian members, the private premium page. At least I say that for now. Those of you, I know there's some Meta people who listen to this podcast. Don't block our premium page, guys. You block the main page. Can you please let the Canadians continue to get the news on the premium Instagram page?
And not just for the Canadians, also for the Mo News community at large, because we really rely on community members around the world to provide us with information about what's going on there. And as we have President-elect Trump about to take office in about a week or so, and he's talking about making Canada the 51st state,
right?
It has been helpful to get Canadians' perspectives.
Oh, like literally we did that last week. We're like, hey, Canadians, chime in on what you think about what Trump is up to here. They have an election coming up. They have their own political chaos right now. So it is very frustrating. And as a creator to now be classified this way, we're sorry to lose you. But Canadians, you can still listen to this podcast. And with a VPN again, you can continue to access our main page. It just requires that extra step of getting a VPN app and turning it on, basically to access us.
Okay, a busy weekend in terms of the news. Let's get to the headlines. An update on the deadly Los Angeles wildfires as the death toll climbs and crews scramble to contain the fires ahead of high winds expected in the next few days. Yeah,
the high winds are back, and they hope that it doesn't escalate things even further.
All while politicians continue to point fingers at one another, blaming each other for poorly handling the response.
Jill, this will keep going. We're seeing it at the federal level. We're seeing it at the local level. We actually had an interview with the fire chief in LA, so we'll play a bit of that in the pod.
And on Friday, the Supreme Court indicated it's likely to uphold the TikTok ban with the deadline approaching on Sunday.
Yeah, you got 6 days left, TikTokers.
And Jack Smith, who led the prosecutions of Donald Trump, resigned very quietly over the weekend. Meanwhile, the president-elect was sentenced in his hush money trial in New York on Friday. He is now a convicted felon, but received no punishment.
We'll explain.
More on the fires, getting to the truth about claims that a billionaire couple is hoarding water in Los Angeles. Plus, Mark Zuckerberg was on Joe Rogan's podcast this past weekend. We'll have his takes on Joe Biden and Apple, which are not so flattering.
And it comes in the week that they stopped fact-checking, and Meta continues to try to engender goodwill from the incoming Trump administration.
And finally, one man's attempt to get a perfect 850 credit score, what he learned in the process. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, on this day in history, A famous song, not to be outdone by famous pants that were featured by the artist of the song. Music history with a side of fashion, Jill.
It doesn't have to be good fashion.
No, it doesn't.
All right, let's start with the fires in Los Angeles. They are still raging, having burned more than 40,000 acres in LA County. Officials are reporting at least 16 deaths so far and more than 10,000 structures damaged or destroyed. There are also 16 people missing in LA County and tens of thousands more structures still under threat, as winds are expected to pick up this week, hampering containment efforts and potentially sparking new flames.
We just want to give you a bit of context on the 40,000 acres. 40,000 acres equals about 60 square miles. So for context here on how much is burned from these fires in LA over the last week, 60 square miles is larger than Miami. It's larger than Boston. It's larger than San Francisco. It's larger than Newark. It's nearly all of Des Moines, Iowa. It's about 2/3 of Cleveland, 2/3 of Seattle, 1/3 of Chicago, 3 Manhattans. Trying to give folks a perspective across the country, Jill, but still, a remarkable amount of area has been burned and destroyed in these fires.
So as we reported on Friday, the winds had finally started to die down Friday and over the weekend. And so firefighters have been able to make some progress fighting two of the most devastating of the fires, the Eaton and the Palisades fires, which are now 27% and 11% contained respectively as of Sunday. Evacuation orders or warnings are still in place for nearly 200,000 residents in LA County. Helicopters were able to make progress the past few days, dropping huge plumes of colorful fire retardant to prevent the fire's spread. They also did major water drops to put out already existent flames. Moshe, you posted a lot of the videos over on the Instagram page, and it is incredible to see it in action.
Yeah, the choreography of these helicopters and planes, Jill, that just are constant. And this is why it's so key that the winds had died down, because they were able to get up in the air. And the concern this week, as the winds kick up again, is that it makes it difficult, because the best way for them to fight those fires, given just the scope here, is from the air.
And even though the fires died down, this is still risky business that they're flying basically right over the fires to drop the water and also the retardant. Unfortunately, though, those efforts might be set back in the coming days as weather officials predict strong Santa Ana winds through Wednesday. Not as strong as when the fires initially spread. They're expected to be about 60 to 70% of the strength of the wind gusts early last week. Yesterday, the FEMA administrator said on Meet the Press that this is still a dangerous situation and that people in Los Angeles should continue paying attention to and listening to their local officials throughout the week to stay updated on the latest protocols.
Yeah, we're still talking about 40, 50, 60 mile per hour winds here, not 100 what we saw, but still those winds can carry these fire embers further away, which is the challenge for firefighters as these little embers blow and continue to drop on trees and rooftops. Making the firefighting effort very challenging.
And there has been a lot of finger pointing as to who's to blame for the spread and the containment efforts. On Friday, the Los Angeles fire chief, Kirsten Crowley, slammed the city's leadership over those $17 million cuts to the fire department's budget. She told reporter Christina Piscucci and Mo News that several reports have found that LA needs double the firefighters and 62 new stations to meet the demands of LA County, and that they were simply not equipped to handle this disaster.
I'm ringing the bell again. Over the last 3 years, I've been ringing the bell and say that our fire department is not properly funded and equipped to meet and exceed the needs of the public.
Crowley says the needs of the city have increased in recent years. She says the LAFD was at a breaking point even before these fires. There were rumors that she was fired on Friday after making these comments, but the union issued a statement assuring people that those rumors were false. On Saturday, Mayor Karen Bass confirmed, saying that the two of them are focused on the same thing, fighting fires and saving lives, and that any differences they have will be worked out in private. Meanwhile, Chief Crowley is facing her own criticism for prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion within the department instead of focusing on the strength and readiness of the LAFD. Yeah,
that's the accusation against Crowley there. It was notable, Jill, that she made a point of coming out strong on Friday in the interview with us, as well as several other interviews. I don't know whether she was anticipating being fired, but she came out, Jill, with more than a dozen memos she's written over the last couple of years demanding more resources for the LAFD. She had them on display when we went to go interview her. And then they had that private meeting, accusation she was being fired. But ultimately here they say they're going to discuss any issues in private between the two of them. Now, that's fighting at the local level. Then you have a fight at the federal level. On Friday, Joe Biden signed a 180-day order. He, of course, is only president for like another week, but this takes you into several months of Trump, basically giving California whatever they need, budget notwithstanding, to help fight this fire and begin the rebuilding effort. Now, eventually, Congress will have to get involved, but Biden's strategy there was to provide aid, sort of lock Trump in on aid, because there is a sense that he might, due to his political differences with Newsom, with Karen Bass, with California, they've had a lot of fights over firefighting strategy, he might cut off California. So Biden tried to make an attempt there to extend aid there. It comes as Trump posted in recent days about California Governor Gavin Newsom, LA Mayor Karen Bass, Biden saying they're all responsible for the fires. They mismanaged responses. He called for Newsom to resign. Now, Newsom wrote a letter to Trump asking him to tour the destruction. He called claims that California should have diverted water from north to south, mis and disinformation. This has been a huge fight between the two of them. Now, the issue in Southern California is not a lack of water, but a lack of water infrastructure and pressure since the reservoirs are full. But there is a separate fight about diverting water in the north from the mountains, which some of it goes straight into the ocean to help the fish population based on what environmentalists have been requesting versus going to farmers and residents. That's been a core fight here. There's multiple fights, we should note, between the feds and state authorities. Notably, no phone calls yet between Newsom and Trump. No phone calls between Bass and Trump. Bass was asked about that at a press conference on Sunday. She's like, I'm not worried about it. We're confident there'll be no issues. We're confident Trump will come here and tour. Notably, Newsom announced over the weekend he'll be loosening environmental regulations so that people can rebuild after the fires more quickly. That is a constant critique of California, as there's too much in the way of regulations and red tape and environmental rules. And so look for this to continue to be an issue once Trump takes office next Monday.
Meanwhile, as you mentioned, before Trump takes office in 1 week, Biden announced that the federal government will cover the full cost of recovery efforts in Los Angeles for 180 days. He was asked if he believes California will get the aid it needs from the next administration, to which Biden said, I pray to God they will. Congress recently passed a short-term government funding bill that included about $100 billion for disaster recovery. But that was mostly for hurricane recovery in the southeastern United States. So Biden said Congress might need to approve more funds for California. And as we know, Moshe, nothing is for certain when it comes to Congress passing anything.
Notably, one of the key senators, Republican Senator John Barrasso, who's in leadership over there in the Senate, said on CBS over the weekend that he believes there will be strings attached to any money sent to aid LA. He said California's response by elected officials to fire issues has been gross mismanagement, his words here. And he said there will be stipulations, making sure California is ready next time something like this does not happen. And so look for strings to be attached here by the Republican Congress for California, various rules that they will try to impose. Among them, you brought up Chief Crowley's focus on social programs like DEI when the fire department was stretched too thin. The taxes, we should note, in California are the highest in the country, but yet the hydrants ran out of pressure. Environmentalists have run the show there. These are all people who believe in climate change, but people are shocked that there's been a lack of policies to adapt the state to new realities here. It's not sufficient enough brush clearing, water distribution, reservoir building, water pressure infrastructure, a whole variety of things to prepare for these types of scenarios. So look for this to be a major issue, because what we're looking at here, Jill, with the Palisades gone, Malibu, parts of Malibu gone here, this is not a months-long recovery effort. This is not a years-long recovery effort. We're talking about a decade to rebuild an entire neighborhood. You have the Eaton fire with an entire community there, with an entire community there where all the infrastructure is gone, right? The gas station is gone, the bank is gone, the yoga studio is gone, the grocery store is gone. And there's going to be a lot here. And in order to rebuild, they're going to need federal aid. But in order to get that, there's going to be certain rules attached.
And add to that this is happening as the fire is still burning and people are taking advantage of the tragedy unfolding. 29 people have been arrested for criminal activity in the past week, some looting homes that have been evacuated. There was actually a burglary call at Kamala Harris's home in Brentwood over the weekend. They detained 2 people in masks outside of her house on Saturday. Law enforcement is now reportedly going undercover, patrolling evacuated areas, looking for potential criminals that are taking advantage of the fire conditions. Meanwhile, there are new indications that some of the LA fires may have been intentionally set. LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell announced Saturday that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, otherwise known as ATF, has officially taken the lead in investigating how these fires started. He emphasized the importance of federal expertise in such cases. So that investigation will focus on identifying the cause of the fires and investigating potential criminal activity along with several local and state arson units.
Jill, I should note, among those 29 arrested, at least one guy disguised as a firefighter looking to get into neighborhoods to rob people. So just very unfortunate that people are taking advantage of this crisis as it unfolds here. It is notable that the ATF is going to run this investigation. They run counterterrorism, they run cartel investigations, very serious investigations. That is not typical of fires like this. So that's the latest indication that the Palisade fire or one of these other fires might have been set on purpose here. Now, the other fire, the Eaton fire, the one impacting Altadena, Pasadena, also under investigation. Now, that's looking increasingly, based on videos, that it was caused by electrical equipment, which wouldn't be a surprise. That has been the cause of some of California's worst firestorms, including the 2018 Camp Fire that killed more than 80 people. Photos and videos taken by residents show what appear to be the first flames of the Eaton fire at the base of a Southern California Edison electrical tower. Now, the company says we have no evidence of that, but the the citizen footage might play a key role here. Right now, federal authorities have asked the power company to preserve all records. And they had said initially, the power company had said, hey, yeah, we totally cut power when the winds kicked up. I mean, that's a thing in these parts of the country. When you have drought conditions and you have very windy conditions, you're supposed to shut down power. Because, of course, if a line gets knocked over in the extremely strong winds, that sets a fire. And in drought conditions, those fires explode. We saw it in Maui. I mean, that's how the Lahaina fire began. And so the power company's like, we totally shut it down. And then they said, oh, actually, upon further review, we didn't shut down the power lines, but it totally wasn't us. So we'll see what happens there. It's going to be weeks or months here before they can determine what caused these fires. Again, you might have different causes here, multiple fires. Citizen video here is going to play a key role.
Okay, now to a story we've been following for the past year. The deadline for TikTok to be sold to a non-Chinese owner or else be banned in the United States. Now 6 days away, January 19th. And it's not looking great for the app, which about 170 million Americans use. The Supreme Court heard arguments on Friday about the future of TikTok in the United States. And based on their questions and comments, the justices seemed poised to uphold a bipartisan law that would ban the social media app in 6 days here in the U.S., unless, again, the China-based parent company ByteDance sells it. Lawyers for TikTok and content creators argued that banning the platform would amount to government overreach and effectively silence 170 million American users who have benefited from TikTok's unique algorithm. They made the free speech argument. Supreme Court Justice John Roberts appeared not to buy the overreach argument, noting that, quote, Congress doesn't care about what's on TikTok. The law is not saying TikTok has to stop. They're saying China has to stop controlling TikTok. On the other side, the Biden administration made a national security argument before the court. Their attorneys presented 2 main justifications for the law. First, preventing covert disinformation from China and blocking China from collecting and exploiting Americans' private data. Take a listen to one of the most surprising exchanges during arguments when Justice Brett Kavanaugh underscored the long-term intelligence risks, and TikTok's lawyer does not dispute the concerns.
I think Congress and the president were concerned that China was accessing information about millions of Americans, tens of millions of Americans, including teenagers, people in their 20s, that they would use that information over time to develop spies, to turn people, to blackmail people, people who a generation from now will be working in the FBI or the CIA or in the State Department. Is that not a realistic assessment by Congress and the President of the risks here?
Well, Your Honor, I'm not disputing the risks. I'm disputing the means that they have chosen. One way, the most direct way to address that, all of this user data sits on data servers in Virginia controlled by Oracle. I'm not talking about the National Security Agreement. What I'm talking about is a law that simply says to TikTok Incorporated and its U.S. employees, you cannot share that user data with anybody. You can't give it to ByteDance. You can't give it to China. You can't give it to Google. You can't give it to Amazon. You cannot give it to anybody under threat of massive penalties. They never even considered that most obvious alternative.
So TikTok's lawyer thinks that there should be other ways to deal with the issues that Congress raised. One option they presented is having some kind of warning label on the app, because that works so well, Moshe. On the other side, the U.S. Solicitor General is arguing that Congress anticipated ByteDance stalling the app sale as a game of chicken. She said if the law is upheld, it would force ByteDance into serious divestment talks. Here is the Solicitor General representing the Biden administration.
At the outset, of course, Congress was hoping to prompt a divestiture, but I think the more important thing to focus on now is that even if that were to happen, Congress specifically anticipated it and provided authority to lift these restrictions as soon as there's a qualified divestiture.
So this is the thing, Jill. Until now, ByteDance has shown zero interest in selling TikTok. Of course, ByteDance has approval from the Chinese government, sort of reinforcing the point that some members of Congress would say that China is in ultimate control here, and they're actually... It is more important to China to have control over this algorithm and the influence TikTok has than it is for them to, than it is for them to have access to the most lucrative market in the world in the U.S. and 170 million American consumers. So there are some people who are arguing on behalf of the legislation that this sort of proves their point that, what was China's real goal here? What's ByteDance's real goal with TikTok if they're unwilling to sell here? And the feeling is once they're banned, maybe they'll be more willing to have that conversation. We shall see. Now, a ruling could come this week. It will likely come this week. They have a couple options. The court could punt here. They could say, listen, there's a new administration coming in next Monday. They have different plans around TikTok. Trump has filed something to, around that. And so they might say, you need some more breathing room on this. It is notable the court did take this up in an emergency type way. They typically take 3 months to come to a decision. They're going to do it in a matter of days here. And so they have the option to punt or they have the option to rule. Now, based on the questions here, if you look at them, you have a couple. John Roberts, conservative, Clarence Thomas, conservative, Brett Kavanaugh, conservative, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, liberal, all based on listening to their arguments and questions, Jill, they all seem to be buying the U.S. government argument here. So you also have Gorsuch and Kagan, conservative and liberal respectively, who push back, and they seem to be a little more sympathetic to the TikTok arguments here. That's interesting. Amy Coney Barrett grilled both sides, so it's tough to figure out where she lands on this. But again, based on sort of the questions the TikTok attorney was getting, it does appear that if the court doesn't punt and actually rules on this, that they will rule in favor of the law here. Especially as you noted, they push back on the free speech argument, saying it's not about what's said on the platform, it's about who owns the platform. And the court, historically speaking, has been pretty amenable to national security arguments, especially when Congress passes a law around it, especially since the law is pretty bipartisan there, Republicans and Democrats. Now, what happens? What can people expect on Sunday? The company says the app will go dark in the U.S. Now, what does go dark mean? It doesn't get deleted from your phone automatically. It'll remain on your phone, but updates will no longer come through the App Store. That is the ban here. So ultimately, effectively over time, you'll get a lot of bugs and issues. And so it'll be more and more challenging to use TikTok here in the US. Now, again, we don't know what TikTok's plan is around going dark. They said they'll go dark on Sunday. We also know that Donald Trump is set to come into office on Monday. He has promised to potentially save TikTok here. It's unclear exactly what he would do. He could give ByteDance an extension based on the law. If ByteDance looks like they're trying to sell, he can give them a 90-day extension if a deal is on the way. Trump may want to, he's the deal maker. He describes himself as a deal maker. He may want to come to some sort of deal here and then determine whatever sale meets the standards of the law. So something we'll watch very closely. Trump has limited options here. He could just tell the Justice Department not to enforce the law, potentially. But again, that you get into issues there because if the Supreme Court rules that this is a legit law. It's constitutional. It ultimately is the law of the land. It's hard for a president who's run on a law and order platform to say, we're going to enforce some laws, but not all laws. So this will be one of the many interesting things we're watching next week. Jill, we should know TikTok has said, they tried to make this argument in court on Friday. There's a separation between them and ByteDance. They are an American company. Yes, they are owned by ByteDance. They also have other shareholders, and American user data is here in the US. But when they were grilled on their links to China, ByteDance's role, ByteDance, knowing the algorithm, the Chinese government connection to ByteDance, that's where things got a little shaky there as we played that Kavanaugh exchange.
Not only that, those safeguards have been in place for years, actually. Those alleged safeguards have been in place, and there have been whistleblowers who have come out to say it's for show. I mean, it's completely superficial. The Chinese government has access to anything that it wants on the app.
Yeah, that basically the fact that they're owned by ByteDance, partially owned by ByteDance, Chinese government, basically any company that's in China, the government can demand things from them. And so that's the counter argument here. That's the argument that Congress made in passing this law. Jill, this is a big deal. I mean, most of us use TikTok, to entertain ourselves, but there are, thousands of businesses, tens of thousands of businesses in America based on TikTok. So we've already seen, I've been seeing a lot of creators transitioning to Instagram, YouTube, saying you can find me here, trying to hedge. So, while for some folks, this won't mean a lot, for many folks, TikTok is everything as far as their business is concerned. So there's a lot of interested parties here who would like to see a solution. And
even from the consumer angle, personally, I'm not on TikTok, but I was chatting with someone on Sunday and she was like, I get all of my recipes on TikTok. I mean, it's how I find out, it's how I get ideas for what to cook. She's like, so this weekend I was saving all of my recipes that I like. And I said to her, you should try to see if the people that you follow are on other platforms as well, because I would guess that they're probably on Instagram or Threads or something, YouTube, something else. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be a big change for a lot of people. Time for the speed read from Politico. Special counsel Jack Smith resigned from the Department of Justice on Friday, a move that was largely expected prior to President-elect Trump taking office. Smith was leading the federal cases against Trump on his charges related to trying to overturn the 2020 election results and his mishandling of classified documents at his home in Mar-a-Lago. The former special counsel's resignation was revealed in a court filing submitted to U.S. District Judge Aileen Cannon on Saturday. The filing asked Judge Cannon to lift her court order that blocked the release of his final report on the two cases against Trump. It comes after Smith saw a number of setbacks in his prosecution of Trump. The classified documents case was dismissed by Cannon in July on the grounds that Smith was unlawfully appointed to his job. Although his team appealed that ruling. The election interference case was hampered and delayed when the Supreme Court made a landmark decision granting Trump immunity from official acts he took as president. In the end, Smith had to drop both cases after the election because of a Justice Department policy that says it is unconstitutional to pursue prosecutions against a sitting president.
Right. And the new president runs the Justice Department. So ultimately is Jack Smith's boss. Trump has suggested that Jack Smith be prosecuted for his handling of the cases. He's actually suggested that Smith be thrown out of the country, be deported. Smith is an American, but Trump has understandably been very angry about the prosecutions here. Now, Jack Smith is looking to release his reports now that the prosecutions are done. It looks like DOJ is going to release at least one report, or hoping to, the one about the January 6th election interference case. Merrick Garland, look for that this week, the Attorney General to release that. The other one will not be released publicly, as we told you, due to the fact that there's a couple co-defendants still on trial who aren't president related to the classified records hiding and obstruction case at Mar-a-Lago. And so they're not releasing the report as to not to interfere with those cases.
Sticking with Trump's legal cases from the New York Times, Judge Juan Merchan officially sentenced President-elect Trump on Friday in his hush money case in New York. The sentence carries no penalty. Judge Merchan gave Trump what is called an unconditional discharge. It is a rare and lenient sentence, basically no punishment. It still, though, makes Trump the first ever convicted felon to become president, but means that he won't get any penalties or be subjected to any requirements going forward. Mershon wrote that, quote, "It appears to be the most viable solution to ensure finality of the case, given that Trump's about to become president." Again, Trump was convicted of 34 felony counts for falsifying business records to cover up a sex scandal where a woman named Stormy Daniels alleges she had sex with Trump and that she was given money from his former lawyer to keep quiet before the 2016 election. Prior to winning the election, Trump had originally faced probation or up to 4 years in prison.
So Mershon said at the hearing on Friday that, quote, Trump, the ordinary citizen, Trump, the criminal defendant, would not be entitled to the protections of the presidency, but he's president-elect. He's set to run the country in a week. And so he decided to do the sentence with no punishment in a unique circumstance that the judge acknowledged here is unique to someone who becomes president. Now, Trump appeared via Zoom. He called this a tremendous setback for the American court system. I've been treated very, very unfairly, he said in a short statement via video sitting next to his lawyer there. So that now ends the New York case. We told you the 2 federal cases are closed here. The last case is that Georgia election interference case, but that's been a mess since we've seen the DA there basically be booted from the case. So it's very unlikely that that case is revived in any way, which means, Jill, effectively, Trump went 4 for 4 here on the cases, specifically around sort of running out the clock here, his legal strategy. There's an argument among some Democrats that Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, got started too late on those federal cases, that he waited a year and a half, that he shouldn't have. Nonetheless, Trump's legal team here, when it comes to the 4 criminal cases, it looks like, yes, he got a guilty verdict, but ultimately no real penalty or punishment around any of the cases.
Okay, back to the wildfires in Los Angeles. Amid water pressure shortages for fighting the fires, some people are focused on a billionaire couple that has a controlling stake in an essential water reservoir. So this story is getting a ton of attention on social media, and we wanted to dive into it a bit because the truth is pretty complicated, a lot more complicated than you may have seen on social media. Okay, from Fortune, some background here. Stuart and Linda Resnick are California's richest farming family. They have a $13 billion fortune. At 185,000 acres, they own one of the biggest private farming operations in America. Their business includes popular brands like Fiji Water, Wonderful Pistachios, Palm Wonderful Pomegranate Juice, Halos Mandarins, and more. They control a significant portion of the American pistachio market. They also own a stake in the Kern Water Bank, which is a 20,000-acre reservoir in the San Joaquin Valley, 100 miles north of Los Angeles. It is one of the most valuable water resources in California, in a region that grows a lot of the country's food. The bank stores about 500 billion gallons of surplus water underground. So the Kern Water Bank is a public-private partnership. The Resnicks own a 57% stake after a deal that was forged in 1994, which lets the Resnicks reserve enough water for their crops to grow, and then they can sell back any surpluses to the state during droughts. That being said, officials have said the issue in LA is not a lack of water, but a problem of how that water is directed and infrastructure pumping water fast enough into the hydrants that firefighters need to fight the fires.
So we should note the Resnick stake in the Kern Water Bank is legal, but controversial. They've been standing by that in the wake of criticism during the wildfires. You know, everything's under scrutiny, even if the water from the water bank here, played no role here. It's out in Bakersfield in terms of water availability for the fires, but all of California's water policy is now under scrutiny here. Now, they obtained access to this water bank legally in negotiations. They wouldn't have been able to build their farming empire without access to that reservoir. Their crops alone consume 150 billion gallons of water a year, 2/3 of which is on nuts, which require a lot of water to grow. Though they have pistachios, pistachios require less than almonds. Almonds are particularly controversial, especially as we've all gotten into almond milk here, because of how much water is required for almonds. Nonetheless, they have a huge stake in the future of pistachios in this country. For reference, the Resnicks farming consumes 150 billion gallons. San Francisco, the city, 70 billion gallons a year. So their farming alone is double the entire city of San Francisco. Now, there is frustration with them because their access to the water has allowed them to build this empire. They can outspend smaller firms, put them out of business here. And that's, among the other things, the frustration here. Now, nonetheless, the Resnicks have tried to become huge philanthropists to try to engender goodwill. They've given away $2 billion in recent years. And so their name is on a whole variety of things across California. They also pledged $750 million to Caltech for climate projects a couple of years ago. But also notable, Jill, they've donated to a number of California governors, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jerry Brown, and yes, Gavin Newsom. They helped Gavin Newsom survive the recall effort against him back in 2021. Notably, Newsom defended them against criticism, not surprisingly, this week. But again, just a lot of questions. As you know, you guys all see stories out there. There's a whole variety of questions. We mentioned it earlier about how California directs its water resources. Does it need to update its fire hydrant infrastructure? Does it need to build more reservoirs? A whole variety of things here as we've entered this new age in California of these extremes. You know, the past couple winters, they got a huge amount of water with those atmospheric rivers. This year, they're in drought. So how do they go about, ensuring they lock in all the water that falls, all the snow that falls in good years, so they can use that to effectively defend against fires in the bad years.
From Bloomberg, continued news from Meta, where they made an announcement last week that they were no longer going to fact check on their apps like Instagram and Facebook. Well, CEO Mark Zuckerberg continued the rollout of all of that with an appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast, an episode published on Friday. So that is where Zuckerberg took aim at the Biden administration for censorship. He told Rogan that White House officials screamed and even cursed at Meta employees during discussions about how to moderate content about COVID during the pandemic. He said they would also demand posts be taken down that were true, including about vaccines.
This really hit the most extreme, I'd say, during the Biden administration when they were trying to roll out the vaccine program. And now, I'm generally pretty pro rolling out vaccines. I think on balance, the vaccines are more positive than negative. But I think that while they're trying to push that program, they also tried to censor anyone who is basically arguing against it. And they pushed us super hard to take down things that were true, right? I mean, they basically pushed us and said, anything that says that vaccines might have side effects, you basically need to take down. And I was just like, well, we're not going to do that. We're clearly not going to do that. I mean, that is kind of inarguably true.
Who is they? Who's telling you to take down things that that talk about vaccine side effects?
It was people in the Biden administration.
Rogan asked if he recorded any of those conversations, which Zuckerberg said they did not. The conversation comes after Zuckerberg has closely aligned himself with Trump before the president-elect takes office. Meta donated $1 million to his inauguration fund, and Zuckerberg had dinner with Trump after he won the election, and he has hired a close Trump ally, Dana White of Ultimate Fighting, to sit on Meta's board.
Yeah, he's also hired some top officials who have connections to the Republican Party to the board. You mentioned the decision to drop internal fact checking, the contracts that they had there. That was a major sore spot for Trump and conservatives who felt that the fact checking was really just left-leaning fact checking. Something Zuckerberg sort of admitted in that statement last week that we covered. Jill, it's interesting, these moves here, this sprint that Meta's making. The New York Times has a report out over the weekend that the reaction inside Meta has been sharply divided. Some employees are celebrating the moves. Others going so far as to say they're now ashamed to work at Meta. Now, ultimately here, the shift has a dual purpose. One, it recognizes the political landscape of the moment, right? That conservative power is ascendant, and Trump takes office January 20th. And he's talked about, going so far as locking up Zuckerberg. And so ultimately, they're trying to curry favor with the new administration. Separately, the Times reports that this also reflects how Zuckerberg is trying to run his $1.5 trillion company, that he's getting his personal views. He's 40 years old now. He doesn't want to keep his personal views quiet. And so that's a bit here, obviously choosing Joe Rogan, someone who's endorsed Trump and sort of made that move. Joe Rogan not so long ago was a Bernie Sanders guy. Now he's a Trump guy. So Zuckerberg choosing to go on Joe Rogan not insignificant there, and a whole variety of moves. Jill, they also made a point of removing tampons from the men's bathrooms that were geared towards transgender employees. So a whole variety of things in terms of online policy, in-office policy there that he's making to sort of recalibrate the company. Another interesting moment from that interview, he took a jab at his rival Apple. He said that he doesn't think they've invented anything great since the iPhone. So he made a point of attacking them on security as well, saying they prevent any other companies from making products that pair as easily with Apple products. So he took aim there. Now, some people would push back on Zuckerberg and say, what have you invented lately over at Meta since you first created Facebook, that everything else was through acquisition? Nonetheless, that is an argument that you do hear against Apple, the argument Zuckerberg made, and goes to Apple's challenge, which is, how to get people to continue to buy their products as they tried to get more into the virtual reality goggles, right? They're trying to find ways to get you the iWatch. They're trying to find ways to get you to buy watches more often. So you see some interesting kind of back and forth there between the tech CEOs.
Okay, and finally, a fun one from the Wall Street Journal. One man's journey to get a perfect 850 credit score. A 52-year-old Texan named Steve Mitchell started to tinker around with closing credit cards, keeping different balances in his account, and then adjusting when he paid his bills. So for 5 years, he would try something new each month and then see how it affected the number in an attempt to crack the formula. He admits it was a tough, sometimes inexplicable code to crack, especially for something so important that can affect whether or not you can rent a home, get a loan, afford insurance. So in 2023, Mitchell finally hit his goal, an 850 score, but he said he wasn't going to consider it a win unless he could keep it for 3 months in a row. And he did achieve that new goal late last year. So he has since gotten an 850 score in 8 of the past 12 months.
Congratulations to Steve. I consider it a win, Jill, to be in the high 700s, low 800s, but good on him for trying to get the 850 there and achieving the 850. So what's the trick here? One of his takeaways, most of the people with the highest scores only use 1% of their available credit. So using more credit cards but spending less on each one is better for your credit score. Although that's not necessarily optimal for your personal financial health if you're managing a whole bunch of credit cards, right? Now, in all, Mitchell said he didn't think it was worth it to get the perfect score. It was a lot of trouble. It was a lot of trouble with not that much reward. People with a 750 versus an 850 don't necessarily get better benefits. Once you achieve that highest bracket of credit scores, you're not getting anything for the perfect score. Maybe you're just getting the Wall Street Journal story and being highlighted on this podcast.
It's the glory, Moshe.
Yes. What have you been up to this year? I got a perfect credit score. All right, now time for On This Day in History. 97 years ago today, General Electric and Radio Corporation of America held the first successful public demo of a home TV set in Schenectady, New York. On this day, 97 years ago, hello, TV. On this day, 57 years ago, Johnny Cash recorded Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison in front of an audience of 2,000 inmates at California's Folsom Prison. On this day in 2021, Donald Trump was impeached for a second time by the U.S. House. This is for January 6th. Now, ultimately, in that scenario, you had 10 Republicans voting with Democrats. He then went to the Senate, where the Senate would acquit him. 7 Republicans, you might remember this, voted to convict him, along with Democrats. They needed 17 Republicans to actually convict him. And ultimately, he, from that moment, pulls off a remarkable rebound. 4 years later, getting reelected. We end here with a bit of music history. On this day, 63 years ago, The Twist by Chubby Checker reached #1 on the Billboard charts. And the answer to our clue at the top, on this day in 1990, 35 years ago, You Can't Touch This by MC Hammer. One of the most iconic tracks of the 90s is released. Jill was making a reference earlier to Hammer Pants. Remember Hammer Pants? They
were kind of like Z Cavaricci's, but even bigger. And if you don't know what Z Cavaricci's are, you probably were not a kid or around in the 90s.
Though I feel like everything comes back. I feel like if Gen Z hasn't brought back Z Cavaricci's, parachute pants are coming back soon.
No, I've seen some suburban moms wearing what I would call Z Cavaricci's. I don't think it's taking though. It's not really, it's like 1 or 2. And I feel like everyone else is like, I'm not ready for it. Okay.
In the words of MC Hammer, they're not going to touch this. Not again.
Well done, Moshe. I cannot top that. So that is a wrap. Thank you all for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It helps us grow. Follow us, subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us kindly in the App Store. Mosh, I don't think people could tell because it was hard to tell listening to this, but you are not feeling great. So please feel better.
Thank you. I keep getting hit this winter. Welcome to parenthood, people told me.
Right. You texted me that you weren't feeling great. And I didn't even really need to say what's wrong. It was just like, what did you get now from the kid? What
did Olivia bring home this time? No, it's all good. We love her very much.
You'll keep her.
I'm going to keep her. I just wish less viruses came with her right now.
All right, guys. Have a good one. Mosh, feel better.
Thanks, everybody.